We want to make sure we give enough time to our speakers who are going to be talking about childhood poverty and housing instability and the homeless crisis among young parents and children right here in Montgomery County. And I think one of the themes that we've heard throughout the day is that we're all linked in one way or the other. You know, there are connections with all of these issues. And so looking forward to hearing this presentation. I'm going to start by introducing our speakers. First, Jasilyn Morgan, who is the Director of Quality Assurance and Program Evaluation with the National Center for Children and Families, also known as NCCF. Jasilyn oversees NCCF's multi-level framework for performance quality improvement, institutional research, and evidence-based practice and regulatory compliance. Jasilyn has a master's in public health and over 10 years of experience conducting research, capacity building trainings, and culturally tailored interventions within various government and nonprofit settings. Ralph Belk is the Deputy Executive Director, Program Administration with NCCF. And Ralph is responsible for providing operational oversight, regulatory and contractual compliance, and overall team leadership through program-level integration, quality assurance, supervision and training, outcome measurements, and financial management. Ralph has over 20 years of administrative and direct practice experience in child welfare and human service fields, working with high-risk children, youth, and families. And then we have Dr. Sheryl Chapman, who is the Executive Director of NCCF. And Dr. Brissett provides agency administrative oversight, consultative support for all programs, and ensures overall contract and program compliance. Dr. Brissett Chapman has more than 30 years of experience supervising international, national, state, and local human service programs, and she's a recognized expert in trauma-informed child and family welfare, child protection, and juvenile justice services. I had the pleasure of just meeting them shortly before we're getting started, and I understand they travel a lot together. So I'm looking forward to your presentation, and welcome.
Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Jasilyn with the National Center for Children and Families. Today we're going to be talking to you guys about this emerging crisis of homelessness among young parents under 25 in Montgomery County. But first, I'm going to tell you briefly about the organization. The National Center for Children and Families aims to create total healthy living environments for vulnerable children, youth, and families, and the quality of life which empowers their ability to thrive and demonstrate responsibility. NCCF utilizes a four-pronged integrated approach to serving our families and children across our 18 programs. Those four prongs include community supports, education and training, volunteerism, and social advocacy. As a part of our organization, we've got 4 different divisions, and our Family Services Divisions has 8 different programs. They include family shelters, transitional housing, and scattered sites, as well as shared family housing. Now, the purpose of this presentation was really to share this massive growth of under 25 parents who are homeless in Montgomery County. It was really important for us to look at this surge, specifically amongst our population, and identify the special needs of this population. While we know we serve homeless families, we wanted to make sure that we were targeting the specific needs of these young parents who are different from other parents who are entering our system. So it was absolutely imperative for us to understand what their special needs were and get down to the root of what brought them into homelessness, as well as the barriers to their housing stability. At NCCF, it's extremely important for us to centralize the voices of our clients and ensure that we use that information to inform and improve our practice. And personally, as the Director of Quality Assurance with a background in public health, it is essential to centralize their voices, utilize that data, improve, improve, improve. And you can't make assumptions about what their needs are or their barriers unless you ask them, unless you do research, and again, utilize that information to inform your practice. So today we're going to talk about what we found in our needs assessment, as well as some of the program innovations that we have done in response to the information that we received. And then again, we'll also talk about some of the implications for local and national reform. So looking at this homeless population in Montgomery County, 1 in 4 homeless households are represented by young parents under 25. Over the last 2 years, they've represented more than 268 households in this county, and 90% of those households were headed by single parents. As a part of our needs assessment, we did both qualitative and quantitative methodology. We conducted clinical case record reviews, as well as a focus group with 10 women who are in our housing continuum. Our Deputy Director of Program Administration is going to talk to you about what we found in our study.
Good afternoon. I'm going to quickly go through our findings, but as I go through them, think about what you're hearing, what you're seeing, and what that means for us as a community as we serve these young families. So first I'll talk about what we found out from our case record reviews. And so the average age of our young parents was 22. 100% of the families we looked at were female-headed households. Ethnicity, 92% were women of color. And of that 92%, 79% was African American and 13 are Hispanic. The average number of children in the household, 2. And then when we looked at our whole population, we had 38 households that we looked at. There were 65 children in those 38 households. And look at the age groups. 26% were less than a year old, and 74% were between the ages of 1 and 5. So these young parents had young children. And then you see, of all the families we're looking at, where they fall as far as number of children. Look at that, 5% had 4 children. Again, these are families with head of households under 25 or under. But look at education. 54%, which is over half, had less than a high school or GED. So no high school diploma and no GED. And think about what that means for their ability to sustain themselves in our county. Which again translates to employment. We have a 45% unemployment rate. And those who were employed, only 10% had full-time jobs with benefits. 45% worked part-time. And look at the hourly wages. The highest is $17, but the range is $2.60, probably a waitress or waitress. But the average is $8.50. Can we live off of $8.50 an hour in our county? Families were linked to some community-based resources, but if you remember this morning, our presenter that started the day off talked about the constraints and the rules that are tied in with a lot of the resources that they're connected with, and how that sometimes hinders their ability to thrive and progress. So then we looked at where did our young families come from before coming into homelessness. So 40% resided with their family, 15% with friends, and then 79% reported the reason for homelessness as being put out. Their families or their friends just put them out. And we'll talk more about that a little later. 20% resided in their own housing before becoming homeless. 15% resided in homeless and or domestic violence shelters. And then 10% resided in other settings like Job Corps. So if we kind of summarize what we found in our record review, again, the average age of the average number of children was 2. Our parents had less than a high school education. There were high rates of unemployment and underemployment, low earned wages, a lot of debt. Even at the young age, they had already had a lot of debt, and poor credit, and then limited support networks. We'll talk about what it looks like, but very few supports. So these young people face extraordinary difficult difficulty with an inability to earn sufficient income, organize and maintain a household, and rear children. So then after we did our file review, we convened a focus group. And we do a lot of focus groups at NCCF just to hear the voice of our consumers, and that voice informs how we improve our practice to be able to engage them better. And we were struck when we did this focus group. It was a little different. We had 10 young female parents, and we were struck with their commonality of their journey. And they all could relate to each other's story. And the stories were, in many cases, horrific and even shocking to us, even after doing so many different focus groups. So here's what we heard. A lot of them experienced domestic violence in their journey. They themselves were victims of child abuse and neglect. They talked about how they were abused within their families. And we began to see that of the 10, I think only one had formerly been involved in child welfare. But as we heard their stories, we kind of said, all of them could meet the criteria to be involved in child welfare. Many of them had talked about being homeless growing up and spending time in family shelters as youngsters. And the one that was in foster care did not transition successfully into independence. They talked about their families, that many of them still maintain strained relationships with their families. And not just strained relationships, many of them talked about how they were being exploited by their families, that they didn't have the natural supports that many of us have. Their families actually waited for the first of the month, and then we'll call them and said, I'll take you to the store if you give me half of your food stamps. Or if you pay me $100 and when your check comes, I'll help you do this or that or the other. So their families were still involved in their lives, but still exploiting them. And this story was actually common between probably 9 out of 10 of the women in the focus group. Lack of spousal or partner support, exploited by families, lack of community supports. They also talked about many of them were connected to either a mosque or a synagogue or a church, and the churches did not help them. They talked about how the church would promise, if you're ever in need, come to us. And they would, but when they came to them in need, they said, oh no, we can't help you with that. That's beyond what we can do. And so even the institutions of religion failed them. History of substance abuse, history of victimization and exploitation, multiple teen pregnancies. Their relationships with men were also horrific. They talked about stories of how many of them said they were looking for their fathers. And so because of their search for their daddy, they ended up with men who exploited them. And so think about the impact on children. Child poverty and housing instability are critical threats to the healthy development of children and increase the risk of this list. Developmental problems, poor nutrition and health, non-proficiency in school, educational disparities, mental health, and emotional problems. And so that leads to possible involvement in child welfare, child abuse, maltreatment, and neglect, placement in out-of-home care, post-traumatic stress. There's an impact of childhood poverty, there's impact and instability for housing for young people. So unless these families headed by homeless youth find safe and stable housing, Montgomery County will consign more children to poverty who will face enormous obstacles to achieving successful outcomes. If we don't have a greater intervention working with these young moms, there will be a cost to us as a community. So Dr. Tappan is going to talk about what we've done at NCCF, and then we'll talk about implications for us as a community. Okay, so I'll continue. So moving young homeless parents out of extreme impoverishment into stable and safe and affordable housing, that's what we do at NCCF. And so we've increased specialized housing units for young parents under 25 because we were noticing in our homeless shelter at GTS, that population has increased over the last, I'll say, 2 years. Increasing number of young families with more than one child. We have developed a high-intensity, integrated, and culturally responsive case management model. You have to really target the barriers that have made them homeless and hone in on those barriers. We've implemented a trauma-informed psychosocial group for parents under 25. When we started this focus group, it was clear, again, how they shared a common journey, but it's also clear how they got benefit of hearing each other's stories. And so they even begged us, when can we do this again? So we said to the staff, how come we haven't been doing this on a regular basis? And so we began a group for these young parents. So best practices. Effective programs for young parents must be framed within a cultural, competent context. They must utilize trauma-informed best practices. We must recognize traumas and social ecological barriers. And we must build on the young parents' strengths and resiliency. Even though they're young, we can't treat them as kids. They are parents. They have responsibilities. And so we must find out what are their strengths and build on those. We must target young families' complex barriers to housing stability, self-sufficiency, and total family wellness. We must connect families to readily accessible services. We must ensure optimal utilization of community resources when they focus on decreasing child welfare referrals, increasing family income, and ensuring stability in safe and stable housing. We also must focus on the needs of the young kids, which also must be a focus on or including developmentally and culturally appropriate services for children, not just targeting the young parents, but also looking at the needs of their kids. We must provide opportunities for them to demonstrate effective, productive leadership for themselves and as parents for their children. Advocacy, teach them how do I advocate for the needs of my kids? So then let's look at implications. Dr. Chapman's going to come and lead us through that discussion around implications for us as a community.
Well, we were really excited about participating with Mark and his brilliant leadership around ending homelessness. I must say, ending poverty rather. I must say that when he brought that up, I thought that, was he dreaming? I was born in poverty, and so I was almost disassociative from my own self. And you heard from Mr. Leggett today, many of us understand the journey from economic deprivation to being able to have enough or even more than enough. And so 1980, the Rockefeller Foundation pulled together all the brilliant child advocates and researchers in this country and looked at everything we knew in our American literature about childhood and came up with 4 assaults on childhood. And that first assault was called poverty. That physical and mental health disability, lack of community support, and family instability would be 3 others, but the most insidious is poverty. And so we were really struck by the fact that efforts to prevent homelessness and instability among parenting youth really reflect the core issue of bringing babies into a impoverished state and growing them completely into adulthood that way. And it really became clear to us that this is really an epidemic that's beginning to reach our wealthy county. But what's in the way? Well, we want to come and talk to you all. We did a white paper, we've passed it around, because we want to make this population visible. Why do you think they're not visible? They're profoundly stereotyped. They're predominantly females because the males aren't held accountable the same way they are. They have the babies. They are disproportionately of color. And they typically come from family systems that have not functioned optimally. As you heard, we were traumatized because we found out that these were the girls who were passed around in their family and never came to an outside system, but they went from grandma to uncle to aunt to cousin, her boyfriend molested them, and it goes on and on and on, and then they become the problem person. So these are the informal foster care graduates, family systems who do not hold on, and we all know people like that. But these particular girls have not been able to move through that journey without the need for structured support. So what have they thought about? Well, the low wage earnings, the low return on education and training. Many of them have gone to some of the schools in this community, but still are not proficient. We know that if you're not proficient at reading by the 3rd grade, you can't learn the rest of the stuff, because you need to be able to read to learn 4th grade material and further, right? We know that if you're not proficient, the research shows, by 3rd grade in reading, you will be part of the 6 million projected unemployed or the group that's incarcerated. And young women are increasing their participation in prisons and jails. Generally, for fraudulent checks and some other kind of stuff, drug distribution, other things that are nonviolent offenses, but still felonies and serious. Lack of affordable housing, that is an ongoing discussion in our region. I live in downtown Silver Spring. I'm struck by my tax base changing so radically. It speaks to the lack of affordability in the hood of Montgomery County. No longer is there a hood, a ghetto, the working class arena. This whole county is becoming quite upscale. The high cost of housing, and there's some research recently that in the last census, this region, and I travel out to the west, we hang out in the Midwest, et cetera, and I now know why people don't like folk inside the Beltway. We get 20 cents on every dollar. It's kept here no matter who's in power administratively. And the 1%ers in our region have outstripped 1%ers in increase of wealth in the entire country. And 7 of the 10 wealthiest counties in the United States are in this region, and Montgomery County is one of them. So we are getting wealthier, and relatively speaking, offensively so, according to some analysis that I've read recently, which I was not aware of. So what we're saying is that there really is an urgent need to respond to the specialized population, that everyone is not the same, everyone doesn't get there for the same reason, everybody doesn't need the same thing. And we're looking at these recommendations. We think this is a targeted population. This group is growing most rapidly. We need to confront that growth and do something different. We need to revitalize the county's apartment housing sharing model so that we can help young parents share apartments and have them more affordable, because they're not going to ever afford, many of them, $1,500 to $2,000 a month apartments in this community. We'd like to see innovative workforce development programs offered by our community partners, which include critical workforce competencies. Everyone does not need a degree. I would believe right now, if some of my social media savvy young parents could be taught how to do software programming, they could make a lot of money quick with a major certification, because those are the jobs that are empty, and I'll never be able to do software programming in my life. The brain is past that opportunity. But there is a need for us to certify current skills, the HVAC technicians, the apartment maintenance technicians. Well, there's enough apartments being developed in this region. At one point, we had more of the cranes, 80% of the cranes in the United States were in this region building upward. We really need to facilitate a way that they can make more than minimum wage. You can't make minimum wage and raise children in this community. We were radical. We said, you know what? Kids going to public school can get free transportation passes. Why can't homeless young parents have free transportation passes because they can't afford transportation? Just write it off. I mean, we're all getting raises on the metro buses, right? Why don't we just make sure they benefit from it too? So, in conclusion, the path to ending poverty begins with understanding it. So I would hope, because I really am bipartisan, I take money from anybody. The liberal progressives are interesting, and the conservative Christians are also my friends. I think it was important for us not to become ideologic, not become so bent on knowing, but becoming informed not knowers, and partner with the young people who are struggling against incredible odds to raise their children, who are keepers of their children, and these resources are precious for all of us. The secret to resolving the Mideast problem, the secret to dealing with overgrowth and overdevelopment, the secret to maybe even ending poverty can lie in the life, the heart, the soul, the brain of a child born to an under 25-year-old homeless parent. So it behooves us to invest. But we have to understand it to end it. Thank you. So I think we have opportunity for a couple questions. We were trying to move quickly because it's been a long day, and the closing will be in 5 minutes. But if there are any questions, comments? Well, you raise a good point, which is the prevention end. We serve these families when they've already hit bottom and have nothing. And so we have intensive case management. We can house them for up to 24 months and pay for it while they figure out how to get ahead of that list or get their application through. But your point is well taken. What about preventive? How do we help them have the resources while they're still in their natural family or community systems? That is the discussion. Unless we look at this special population, all the way from the beginning, they will continue to drop out as they are in more and more numbers into a flat homeless state. So that is the question. How do we invest more so they can get those resources without having to become fully dependent on our housing programs? That is the question. And that is the advocacy agenda. Get her number. Yes, exactly. So the other part of that we were trying to get to, but we don't have time, around the trauma informed, trauma affects your brain. Trauma affects your genes. We now know that the nature-nurture thing is not a versus at Harvard. It's an interactive effect. We will do some things because it's in our nature, and in the right environment, we'll click into it, or not do some things because it's not our nature. On the other hand, what happens to us influences how our genes evolve, right? So that means that if you've been traumatized, and we have another study we did on black male adolescents, but this population is probably almost in that same category of trauma exposure and stereotypes. It affects your vacant self-esteem, your internalized self-hatred, your ever-present anger, your inability to tolerate frustration. So we have to get really out of our boxes and our stereotypes as systems, because the new human services system cannot be lateral and requirement driven. It's got to go and perhaps have some classes, can I go there? At her apartment unit, till she builds some confidence about, oh, I could do this, because she's got trauma from being laughed at in school because she couldn't read in the 5th grade at the 3rd grade level. Do you understand what I'm saying? We've got to be able to support that young person knowing how to explore and take risks and initiate and overcome failure, because failure is what gives you success. But that's not intuitive. That's how you've been raised, how you've been given example. So we have young people that need that, but they're not going to get it by you having a class at Montgomery Works, and they all got to be up there at 9 o'clock and sitting there for 2 hours. That won't happen because of the trauma impact. And it's not because, excuse me, it's not because they're lazy, trifling, immoral, ignorant, or quote, unavailable, resistant. The things we make up because we're stuck in our old brain stuff. We've bought into this one way to do it, rather than understanding it. So we'll take his number. Because I'm 64, my average staff person is 30, and they made me do social media because they told me, you want a strategic plan, Doc, and we can't even do Facebook on our computers. Well, all the politicians have a Facebook, so you're really unwired. And I go, really? So what happens is we've got to have that intergenerational connection. There's some things that we know work in terms of order, but there's so much creativity and adaptiveness that our systems and our approaches are not doing. So we've got to partner across the generations. We've got to let some young people lead. We've got to let some young people figure it out because their brains are under 25 too, and they're still working in the creative realm. I got nothing but experience like most of us I see in this room. And so we're likely to see the problem the same way no matter how much information we're fed. It's our brain. So we have to expose ourselves to different relationships. So this stuff is, Ronnie was talking about the network. Well, the relationships that got to change is us as adults rather than focusing on making someone else do something different. Margaret Wheatley's work, we can't boss anybody around. We can't direct them, but we can choose to do something different as adults that inspire them to take the risk to learn how to be a software programmer. Because really, if my brain was better, I would take that offer. Any other comment? Question? Yes. We used to have that in the county.
Yeah. What are you working on? What are you getting through on that? Because I know that, for instance, you're trying to do accessory apartments. That's just a very small one. But it's very, very difficult to put an accessory apartment in a house. And I can imagine you guys are running into similar issues with co-housing. Can you talk about some of the relationship coming up against as well as how you're looking?
Well, this is a model that has occurred in the past. It kind of died out in the county. But this is really allowing two parents with subsidized housing live in the same apartment. So you may have a 3-bedroom apartment, each has one, and their 2 kids share one. And that's a whole new model. I mean, for immigrants and for folk like me that come from big farm families, sharing rooms is really not new. It's kind of like what we do. But there's a lot of policies and a lot of barriers about government support of sharing, about how much square foot, and the sex and the gender of the kids, et cetera. And even the landlords, how many kids can you have? Everyone needs to have a room. So that's got to be something that becomes maybe even a task force. I think the housing community, homeless community is already looking at that on their agenda for exploring it. But if we had more community support around, that's a good idea. I mean, let's be real. Let's look at where the professionals are going. They're all sharing. These young professionals are coming out of college, grad school. They're sharing apartments. They're sharing houses. They can't afford it on their own. So we see the need that for under 25-year-old homeless parents too. They need to be able to have other options besides go back home, which frankly, sometimes they do, but it's not a good thing that they do it. Anyone else? Yes.
What type of activities are the younger, the 25 below, doing? I mean, I'm assuming there's education, there's counseling. Are there any recreational or even new types of recreational programs they might do?
Recreational programs?
And therefore, we working with other people there to develop relationships that are different.
Well, here's the piece. Part of what we haven't rolled out all of our asks, but we see the case manager for these families that are homeless under 25, they shouldn't have more than 5 families. We need to have very intense case management so they can help them figure out I don't know how many of you have done that, how to balance me, work, a house, and the kids. Gloria Steinem says, we're still being screwed as women. So, because we get to do all of it. And unfortunately, because they're poor, they have no choice to do all of it. So how do you fit in recreational? How do you fit in other kinds of creative, futuristic, cultivating, critical activities is the challenge. And that is the challenge. Because if it's just about the humdrum of working, paying bills, taking care of the kids, then you do not have a thriving, wholesome healthy environment, or a parent leader who's happy about doing what she does and willing to make the sacrifices. So you're absolutely right. And I think, Ralph, unless you have a comment, I don't think we've gotten that sophisticated yet, even in our model, and we're ahead of a lot of people, because we're trying to help them balance those other things. We are looking at life coaches and mentors. In DC, we do family-to-family mentoring, where we actually subsidize a family to mentor a family, so they can experience having a vacation together, how to take your kids on a trip, how to do fun things. But it's very hard to get underwriting for that. But we're looking to try to do that more. So your point is, again, well taken. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Right now, we're dealing with, Ralph, what would you say? We're dealing with recovery from drug abuse, recover from maltreatment, domestic violence, family estrangement, heavy issues, literacy, finishing your high school diploma. And so at some point, there's so much. And 2 years is such a short time to deal with it. But when we say we really need them in a program for 5 years, AB looks like, what? And who's going to pay for that? And that's not enough bang for the buck. So we're always balancing that. It's a very hard sell, because people want to see them as adults when it comes to spending money on them, but children when it comes to listening to them. Did you hear me? Wow. No, really. That's kind of how I treat my own children. But anyway, yes. Yes, Miriam.
Scholarships to the kids for sports, after-school programs, et cetera, because the parents and the kids have to be there together typically, and they meet other parents that are doing this. So with the kid involved in the recreation, it opens up a whole new circle for them, and we pay for that. That's what I thought.
We have a model called Nurturing Camp, but I was looking at that as parenting still and co-parenting with friends. But I'll be honest with you, maybe I'm just because I'm 64. At 25 or younger, you need to have some time to do you. Do you. I mean, really, do you. Put on some makeup, some heels, go hang out with the girls. No, see this piece about that getting pregnant again? I think that's what happens. They become the burden of the stereotype, because there are women who wish they could have 2 or 3 kids. And I'll be honest with you, the stereotype is this, and I want to say it because I'm African American. My first child was born at 25. I had 2 degrees, a husband, and everyone thought I was late having one. But if I, looking just like me, had no husband and no income, it would be, what? Are you going to get pregnant again? So at some point, what does it mean to have children? Who's entitled to have children, and who has the right to get support? Does that make sense?
You also, I'm assuming you still do, people will come in to manage doors, because I used to volunteer to come in.
Yes, we do that. We do that. But the real deal is these women are stressed because they can't provide Maslow's first basic reality: shelter, clothing, and food for their children. Unless they manage that, the manicures will not lift them out of depression. Yeah. I think we're probably at the end, but thank you for staying this long day, and give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you.